Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, a fragile peace takes hold in Lebanon.
More than a year of bombardment by the Israeli military has forcibly displaced 1.2 million people, mostly from southern Lebanon. Many of them are now returning to their homes.
A ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is supposed to end over a year of violence. But how likely is it to stick? And what does it mean for Gaza? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. It's been an unpredictable last few days in Lebanon.
Israeli strikes in the heart of Beirut and across Lebanon. A violent curtain raiser to an announcement from Washington on a ceasefire agreement.
After months of all-out conflict, a ceasefire appears to be holding.
As dawn broke, people who've been displaced by months of Israeli attacks were already beginning to return home.
And my guest today has been living it.
I'm Justin Salhani. I'm a freelance journalist, and I'm based in Beirut.
I spoke with Justin on Wednesday evening his time, the day after Israel and Hezbollah had agreed to a ceasefire.
I'm cautiously optimistic. There's a lot of doubters. A lot of people are doubting that it will hold. I think there's not a lot of trust in the Israelis to hold on to this, especially considering, what we've seen in Gaza for the last 14 months.
Justin, welcome back to The Take. I know that you had been hearing about the possibility of a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel for a while. And finally, on Tuesday night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that the ceasefire had been approved by Israel's security cabinet.
The length of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon.
That is supposed to end over a year of fighting that escalated in recent months in southern Lebanon and in Beirut, where you are. Take us through your day when the announcement was made. What happened?
Essentially, we woke up knowing that the possibility had been discussed, that these discussions had been going on, and that there was progress. At some point during the day, we were told that Netanyahu would be speaking in the evening. Now, knowing that it was in the evening, we also know that meant it was going to be a very long day. Historically, conflicts tend to get more intense towards their end. The Israeli side in the past, in 2006 and in past wars, has intensified as negotiations are ongoing, and particularly when they get towards the close. So we were expecting a hard day. I don't know if we were expecting that hard a day.
An extensive wave of near simultaneous airstrikes. More widespread destruction on what are now largely empty neighborhoods in Beirut's southern suburb.
There were about 20 strikes in, I think, under a minute or something like that, which is, one of the most violent periods we've seen so far. And then I'm in my office in a part of town called Hamra, and I got a phone call basically asking me where I was from a colleague, and saying that there was a evacuation warning for also this part of town, which is the first one since the start of the war.
And Hamra, for those who are uninitiated, is this hip, chic part of town, lots of cafes, lots of bustling streets usually. So this is unusual.
Yeah, it's a touristy kind of part of town sometimes. Not in the way that you might imagine a European town, but it doesn't necessarily have the chic and glamour it once did. But it's still a part of town that, hasn't been attacked by the Israelis since probably the 80s. So it was it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. We're hosting a lot of displaced here, and other parts of the country that are hosting many displaced have also been hit in the past. But it was still kind of a shock. I got out of the office and I moved towards my house, kind of thinking, what should we do in this situation? I'm kind of stubborn. I like this part of town. This is where my dad is from. This is where my family's from. I don't want to leave it. I got plenty of calls saying, come to my house, come up the coast. I also got calls from people in the neighborhood as well, friends of mine who said, where do we do? Where do we go? One of the suggestions was make it to the American university. Even during the Civil War, that was a safe place. So I decided to try to go down to the university, but as I was going down the stairs, my neighbor was very calmly going into his house and said, why don't you come inside with us? So we all kind of cracked the windows, cracked the doors, sat in the hallway, which had the least amount of glass, took the mirrors off the walls, and kind of waited for a while. You crack the windows, you crack the doors, the idea being that if the windows are fully shut, the impact of a blast can break the glass, and that's how many people die. The doors, if shut, can blow off, break the door frame. So you crack the door so that it just slams shut. And then essentially are sitting around waiting for the blast. On Tuesday evening, there were a number of speeches, and that included Benjamin Netanyahu's speech, where he announced that there had been an agreement, that it had been agreed upon.
A good deal is a deal that is enforced, and we will enforce it. With God's help, we will establish security. We will rehabilitate the north and continue united until victory.
So that was when we kind of knew, because there were doubts, we kind of knew that the agreement would most likely go into effect. We still hadn't heard a blast. Shortly after he spoke, we heard two. Not back to back, but within a few minutes of each other. So we went to bed knowing that tonight could still be, quite tumultuous. I won't speak for everyone else. I usually have my phone on silent, but I turned on the notification, so it was buzzing all night with various, messages and updates and everything like that. And I think I woke up at 3:55, 3:56, 3:57, and again until the ceasefire went into effect at 4 a.m. And then there was this strange silence.
Wow, Justin, the calculations that you've had to make, the fact that the best way to survive a blast is keeping the door open, how to keep the windows cracked, all of that are things I think most people never have to think about. I'm really glad you're okay, but it all speaks to the tumultuousness of these last few hours until the ceasefire took effect. So it took effect early Wednesday morning. What are the details that they actually agreed to that has led to this strange silence?
The details involved the Israelis who invaded in October, crossed the southern Lebanese border and engaged Hezbollah in a number of battles throughout the south, will over the next 60 days have to pull back across the blue line, which is essentially the line that separates southern Lebanon from northern Israel or occupied Palestine. Then you also have the condition that Hezbollah will have to remove themselves from South Lebanon going north of the Litani River, which kind of cuts across Lebanon and at different distances from the border at different points. The Lebanese army within those 60 days will also be deployed to South Lebanon. Both sides in this paper that was released retain the right to defend themselves, essentially. But I think the big key conditions here is that the Israelis will be out. Hezbollah is supposed to go out. It's a similar breakdown to UN Resolution 1701 that ended the 2006 conflict. Of course, in 2006, these sort of conditions didn't last that long. Israeli violations of Lebanese airspace continued pretty much, it didn't take too long for that to happen again. And of course, Hezbollah didn't get out of the south. So it's yet to be seen that, how these things will be implemented.
You mentioned something that is key, and that's that both sides reserve the right to defend themselves if needed. In his speech, you mentioned earlier, Netanyahu stressed that Israel maintains the right to respond to any threat from Hezbollah.
In full cooperation with the United States, we retain complete military freedom of action. Should Hezbollah violate the agreement or attempt to rearm, we will strike.
So then what is your sense on whether or not this is actually going to put a permanent end to the violence if both sides reserve the right to restart hostilities at any time?
I think for there to be permanent peace, there needs to be a number of things that change here. The big question that we have here in Lebanon, and for a number of people, what I'm hearing from various people is who's going to enforce that the Israelis don't use force whenever they decide to do that, as they have done historically in the West Bank and in Gaza. If we look at the last, year and change of the genocide in Gaza, of Israeli aggression in the West Bank and in Lebanon, there's been no actor that has really held them accountable, not in the international community and not for their main backer, the United States. So, the Biden administration has never been willing to do that. There's a big question mark whether the Trump administration will do that as well, especially considering the steps that Trump took in his first term removing sanctions on anything related to the West Bank, and essentially using, the word Palestinian as a slur. So while there are differences between, Palestine and Lebanon, I still think that question remains. So many people here don't see this as a permanent settlement. It's a brief reprieve. It's a bit of a relief. There's not active violence anymore. For this to become more of a long-term permanent thing, there's still a number of questions to be answered. But I think right now, people are taking a short-term outlook on this.
Yeah, a little sigh of relief for now. You mentioned a brief reprieve. What is the mood like? What do you see right now?
It's a mix. It's a mix of things. I think there's a cautiousness in a lot of places. A lot of people have lost loved ones, have lost their homes. Despite that, there's still a positivity this morning. People were on the roads before daybreak. There were images circulating on social media of roads going south, bumper to bumper. A number of people,
Bumper to bumper, people going back to their homes that they had fled.
Right, exactly. They're trying to get down to their villages. And there's questions if they'll be able to access all these villages, right? Because there are still Israeli forces in parts of the south. So again, there is moments of genuine joy here. People are, we've seen more maybe kind of posters and images of the late Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, and his, what was expected to be kind of his successor, who was also assassinated, Hisham Safiuddin, have started to emerge on different cars. But I think the main feeling here is just that there's such a widespread fatigue that today, we've all woken up a bit happier. There's plenty of jokes circulating on group chats, and maybe talks of a few people, gathering and trying to express the joy that has been absent in the country for the last couple of months for sure, and the last nearly 14 months for those people who have been displaced from their homes.
So could a ceasefire in Lebanon help bring an end to the war in Gaza? That's after the break. Well, Justin, you described people waving or holding pictures of the late Hassan Nasrallah, leader of Hezbollah. And I wonder if that is being felt as a victory, because a key condition that Hezbollah had was Israel needed to agree to a ceasefire. There had to be a ceasefire in Gaza for their firing to stop. So why have both sides agreed to a ceasefire now?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. I think Netanyahu, as he said in his speech, Israel took out much of Hezbollah's military leadership. They killed the big figure, not just in Lebanon, but in the Middle East, of Nasrallah. They regained some of that kind of prestige and mystery for the Mossad and the Shin Bet through this the pager attack and the walkie-talkie attack in September. In a lot of ways, Netanyahu can point to things and say that they've won this. They also won it in the sense that they, as you mentioned, broke the link that was the one condition that Nasrallah put in place for a long time, which was ceasefire in Gaza. We will stop firing rockets when there's a ceasefire in Gaza. The connection was broke, I think, basically because the Israeli brutality was just so strong, and that the community was so battered and beaten and so tired that, they felt that this was something that they had to do for the country, for the people, to make sure that the situation just didn't continue to deteriorate and get worse. Lebanon's been in an economic crisis for going on 5 years. Even before the war, things were difficult here for a lot of people, for people below the poverty line and others. So, people say that there's a victory for the side of Hezbollah. I mean, many of their partisans will say that essentially because there wasn't a widespread occupation. The Israelis weren't really able to hold land, or, to question whether they weren't able to or whether they chose not to. One side will claim this, the other will claim that. But, at the end of the day, there was a ceasefire. So I guess that's why it's being spun in that way. They have survived as an organization. So again, it's a case of both sides being able to spin it for the way that they want. But we also have to look at, now with the conditions that Lebanon and Hezbollah in particular seem to have agreed to, what does the future of the party look like?
Yeah. Well, Justin, we're talking about a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, but that has many people wondering, what about Gaza? What about the Palestinians? U.S. President Joe Biden said that the Israel-Hezbollah agreement was a reminder that peace is possible and that the reason there wasn't a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is because Hamas is to blame.
So now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages, including American citizens, which they hold. In the process, bring an end to the fighting, which would make possible a surge of humanitarian relief.
When a reporter asked him if he could get a ceasefire in Gaza before leaving office, he said he was praying for it. What do you make of that? Could the ceasefire in Lebanon actually help bring an end to the war in Gaza?
Unfortunately, I think it's quite difficult. And I think Biden should probably do more than just pray. His claim that the issue is Hamas, I think, has been disproven time and time again, that Netanyahu's been a key cog in making sure that there's no ceasefire in Gaza. And that's been true since last October, since October 2023. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like there will be a ceasefire in Gaza because I don't think Israel and Netanyahu in particular wants there to be for this moment. The fear here is that the violence in Gaza will continue essentially because the international community has been so indifferent to it for going on nearly 14 months now. In fact, I think another one of the fears here, as I mentioned earlier, is that, as Biden has shown himself incapable of holding Israel accountable, and with Trump coming into power, that a lot of this may actually extend now into the West Bank. So while, it's a day of relief here, a number of the people I've spoken to have said that they still have Gaza in their thoughts, in their hearts. And, there is a heavy feeling that while we may have escaped to live for another day here, we know that it has come at the expense of so many people in Palestine that are suffering today.
What a poignant way to end this conversation. Justin, thank you for walking us through what these last few days have been like. We really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure.
And that's The Take. We want to hear from you. What stories do you want to see on the next show? Let us know in the comments below what you'd like us to cover. Your feedback helps shape future episodes, so don't be shy. We'll see you tomorrow.